Zhilei Zhang versus Joseph Parker. The co-main event to this Friday's Knockout Chaos card. Many people see this as the highlight of the card, and I can certainly understand why, because realistically, this could be a main event in its own right, topping its own card. If you look at it on paper, you got two guys who are most definitely on the up and up, both of them coming off of career best wins, and both of them are known proven quantities. And for this reason, I will easily admit that I'm finding this extremely difficult to call. Like, I'm not even going to pretend. Shamelessly, I'm even tempted to sit on the fence, but I'm not going to take the easy way out. Let's talk about this fight. I'm going to talk about both guys, how I envisage the fight going, how I think they should approach it, and hopefully we can land on a prediction for this one. So starting with the man from China, the Big Bang, Zhilei Zhang. Like many people, I've been incredibly impressed by Zhang recently. Um, Definitely one of my favourite fighters to watch from a stylistic perspective, but also his personality. There's this certain swagger that Zhang has, and his performances, but also his personality, really, I think, are representative of him coming into his own and finding his stride. Because all we have to do is look back, 3 years ago, in around 2021, when Zhang was known, but nobody really rated him. He just looked like a big guy from China. And now in professional boxing, Chinese fighters at high level, they're not really that common, much less elite Chinese heavyweights. But I feel like Zhang is, as I say, he's come into his own. He's found what works for him, and he's really finding his stride, and he's got a lot of momentum. And stylistically, Zhang, very dangerous. He's a big punching, two-handed southpaw who's incredibly sharp on the counter punching, particularly early. So there's a lot there to behold, definitely. However, playing devil's advocate, and I've got my boxing analyst cap on. Let's be real, Zhilei Zhang has looked good. He's looked very good recently. But who's that been against? He's been against Filip Hrgović, who he lost to, although many people thought he beat Hrgović. I'm not going to argue with them. It was a very close fight. Zhang looked good against Hrgović, and he looked good, very good, against Joe Joyce twice. These are big, relatively lumbering heavyweights. Joe Parker doesn't fit that mould. Joe Parker is by no means a small man, far from it. It's crazy to think that he can't really be considered a big heavyweight. He's decent sized, 6'4". What's Parker like? 250-ish. I think that's his limit. But he's not a big heavyweight. But that doesn't matter necessarily. It doesn't mean, Parker's not as big as these guys, therefore he doesn't stand a chance. Quite the opposite. Parker, I feel, has the tools to make his size disadvantage, quote unquote, work. If we look at Parker, time and time again, he's shown that he can move quite well, you know, and he's quite a naturally thick-set guy. So in most instances, I want to say, putting aside the Joe Joyce performance, he has quite good stamina. Joe Parker's someone who can go rounds. His main issue previously over the years has been mental, where you can kind of dog Parker out of a fight. And if he runs out of ideas, he doesn't always have that fire in his belly. And, he gives up rounds, He just doesn't know how to, or he didn't know how to kind of grab a fight from the jaws of defeat and turn it on its head. We saw there were instances like in the Dillian Whyte fight where he came so close, but it was just too late. But he does seem to have gained a bit of a boost, particularly recently. Ironically, after suffering that really bad defeat to Joe Joyce, I didn't think Parker would be able to come back from that, but he has. And these points that I've spoken about his mobility and his stamina, I think he'll need to rely on them, because punch for punch, I don't think that he can compete with Zhang. When you see Zhang, this big, tall, balding Chinese guy, He doesn't look like much, but he is an athlete. He's an explosive athlete, and he's a sharpshooter as well. And if you look at the quality of Zhang's punches, particularly his counters, there is it's refined. Whereas with Parker, even in his last performance against Wilder, which was his best performance to date, his magnum opus, if you will, there were still moments where you saw Parker's offense and it was just a little bit ragged. It wasn't as refined. It wasn't as tight knit as Zhang's. And so that's why I say punch for punch, I don't think he can compete with Zhang in that regard. But I think he can actually out hustle Zhang, because Zhilei Zhang, as I say, he's sharp, he's explosive, he's that sharpshooter, but he's low volume. He likes to make all of his punches count, and he does so quite well, particularly early when he's fresh. So what I feel Parker needs to do is draw the sting from Zhang over the rounds. He needs to be patient, early rounds, mid rounds, looking to make Zhang miss and sap his energy. I don't think people realize that when you're in a combat situation and you miss a punch, that takes a lot out of you, especially when it's a punch that you've committed to. It doesn't necessarily need to throw you off balance and get you spinning around comically, but it's still that lack of impact. You have to make up for it somehow. You know, when you're in the bag, when you're in the pads, even if you're, I don't know, sparring someone who's like a potted plant and they block your shots, because you're getting some kind of feedback, it's not as draining. But as soon as you start missing punches, that's when you can really have your gas tank tested. And I feel like that's what Parker needs to do. He needs to be mobile and make Zhang miss, sap his energy, draw that sting. But he can't, is a fine line, he can't run, because running is never a good visual. It gives away rounds, you're not the ring general, it doesn't look like you're implementing the kind of fight that you want. And against a fighter like Zhang, who's very confident already, and you have to imagine he believes like he's the dog's bollocks after the way he's dealt with Joe Joyce especially. He's already very confident. You can't give him that momentum, because imagine if Joe Parker comes out and already he's on his bike before Zhang's even thrown anything. Zhang's going to think, this guy's terrified of me. Let me just close him down. And I think that's what Zhang is going to try and do. He's going to try and pin Parker down, close the distance, and get him in a place where he can basically let rip. It doesn't necessarily mean he's going to do 10 punch combinations, but he's going to try and pierce Parker's defense. And that's one thing that Parker can't afford to do. As I say, he can't just give up ground. He needs to do something very similar to what he did with Deontay Wilder, where he's in front of him and he's kind of standing his ground, but he's just outside of range where he's safe, but it's not a completely defensive visual. And then if he moves around, maybe staggers the timing, because Zhang's a counter puncher, so he's looking to find any pattern he can. Parker will need to be wary of that and think, okay, I need to stagger my time and I need to throw him off, whether that's feinting, whether that's a bit of in and out movement. And as soon as he is able to get Zhang to bite, be prepared for it, and then out hustle Zhang. It might not be the cleanest offense, it might not be the most eye-catchy offense, but if he can do that round after round after round after round while making Zhang miss, maybe he can tire Zhang out. Maybe he can get to a point where Zhang just doesn't have the same pop on his punches, just has lost that sharpness, it's just dulled a bit, and then Parker can be a bit busier, maybe start to land some cleaner offense, and pick up some rounds a bit clearer. As I say, I think Zhang is going to look to try and close the distance. He'll want that forward momentum where maybe he forces Parker to get a little bit desperate and throw some punches just to keep Zhang off, but then Zhang can counter with that, because that's the thing. Zhang, he's an athlete. He doesn't look like one, but he's an athlete, and he's creative with his offense. He's not afraid to mix it up with both hands. And if he lands, boy, Joe Parker's going to know about it. That being said, though, I can see how both guys could win, but I do think that this fight going to points is likely. I don't see this fight ending in a stoppage. I could be completely wrong. Maybe Parker throws a big overhand right haymaker, floors Zhang, buzzes him, tees off. Maybe Zhang lands that left hand, lands that right hook, and completely separates Parker from his senses. Could happen, I don't know. But I don't think so. I actually think this fight is going to be fairly quiet. Maybe similar to the Wilder fight, where it was intriguing and it was kind of edge of your seat stuff in the moment, but looking back, it was actually quite a dull affair where nothing happened. I say nothing happened, like there were no crazy shootouts and no trading or anything like that. I suspect the fight's going to go down that route. And if I'm pressed to pick a winner, I got to say, even though I prefer watching Zhang, I do think that Parker gets this one. And call it an instinct, call it a gut feeling, but I look at recent performance. Parker had his last fight against Wilder. Zhang had his last fight against Joyce. Both amazing performances for both guys. Looking at those, I feel like Parker's fight against Wilder prepares him better than Zhang's fight against Joyce. Even though Wilder and Zhang, completely different fighters, both very dangerous in their own right, but different stylistically. If you look at how Parker had to approach that fight, he had to be extremely wary of Wilder, who, you know, love him or hate him for all his faults, he can turn a fight on its head. But Parker had that discipline. He knew where he had to be at what point, at which point. He knew where he was safe and he knew when to attack. And he didn't really put a foot wrong. And I think the kind of mindset that you have to be in to win a fight like that, I think that's the kind of mindset that Parker needs to be for this fight. So he's had a little bit of practice. And now it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to translate completely over to this fight against Zhang, because he's got other things he has to watch out for. Zhang is a two-handed fighter, not like Wilder, who's just one-handed. And even with the right hand, he can only throw it one way. But if we look at Zhang's performance against Joe Joyce is big. He's mobile, but he can be mobile, but he's slow. He's easy to hit. And I don't think he has that that quickness. I mean, he certainly doesn't. He doesn't have the same quickness as Joseph Parker. And I think that has the potential to throw Zhang off, or at least just keep him away to the point where Zhang can't really land that offense. However, I can also see how Zhang does get his offense off early, and maybe he can hit Parker with something to really shake him up and get him reeling and create that bad visual where Parker isn't so willing to engage and gives up too many rounds, and Zhang hoovers them up and then gets a decision. However, I'm going to go with Parker. I feel like the Wilder fight has set him in good stead, and I can see Parker picking up a 12-round split decision, something like that. Something that's close but deserved. Close but deserved, I'll say that. Maybe it's a fight of two halves. Maybe it has the public divided. But I personally think that Parker's going to win a 12-round split decision. And I think it will be well earned. You know, probably not the greatest fight. I hope I'm wrong. But I don't see how the styles really gel to make this like a fight of the year contender. I think it's going to be a relatively quiet affair with maybe some moments where you're thinking, oh, like this is going to heat up. But then it kind of simmers down and falls into that pattern across the 12. That's just my opinion, however. We got to see what happens come Friday. But leave your thoughts in the comment section below. What do you think of my take? What's yours? Who do you think wins and how? But for now, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you on the next video.